I always read comics from the time I was a kid. I used to buy comic books. I shamefully say I read Archie and Veronica, and I collected Superman. We all want to be greater than we are, or stronger, or faster, or there are things that we wish we could do, like fly, or see through walls, and all those kinds of things. So those things always appeal to me. Sometimes we'd be Superman, people would throw kryptonite at you and you'd go down. I mean, we acted. We acted, you know, very strongly, and we had theme music. We did the whole thing, you know. Dun, 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 dun. When we fought, we made music sounds. We make all the fist sounds.
The superhero is absolutely essential, especially for young male readers who want to get in touch with their manhood.
Well, it's no mystery that power fantasies are something that relates to an adolescent boy. I mean, what a time of our lives to have such a desire for power, such a sense of our potential power, but always feel as if the world is keeping us down, keeping us from attaining that power. Superheroes are tailor-made for that age group.
Superheroes are, in fact, I think justified by the fact that they are a genre mishmash of every form of fiction, and this including science fiction, fantasy, mystery, magic, myth, all that jumbled into one package.
To me, the true superhero and the ones who have survived coincide with the true mythic hero, as I've said. They have the power. They have the power. Sometimes, and they get the call. The call is a mystic thing, like I say it. It can be a bat flying in your window. It can be anything. Sometimes they avoid the call. Bruce Willis tries to avoid the call, but they can't. They can't, because they are put on this earth, sometimes sent to the earth on a rocket ship, you know, but they are put on this earth to fight evil, to fight the evil, to make things better. And that's the hero in his purest, in his or her purest form.
They're like basic morality plays. It's kind of like watching a Hong Kong movie. There's a set of bad guys, there's a set of good guys, and everybody's got a purpose, and it's very clear cut. But everybody's loyal to everybody else. The bad guys are very loyal to the bad guys, and the good guys are very loyal to the good guys.
You can't have good without evil. If there's no evil, I mean, you can be a good person, but you can't be a hero with no evil, because you have to make it better. And there has to be something that you must make better. I mean, if there's nothing for you to fight, then you'll just stay in Smallville, you know, and be a nice guy all your life. But you can't ever become a hero unless there's something for you to conquer.
These are archetypes. These are ideas that live within our heads, that are hardwired into our brains. They manifest themselves as stories. If they're well done, they manifest themselves as stories that are appropriate to a given time and place.
One rainy night, very much right out of the Spirit scene, I was sitting in the studio, and I got a call from the guy who was going to be my partner in the venture. He's the guy that brought us together, Busy Arnold. From a bar, I could hear the jukebox going in the background, and I hear the tinkle of glasses, and he says to me, "How you coming?" I said, "Well," I think I've got the first story, and I think I've got the character. And what I had sketched out on the drawing board was a guy looking very much like Cary Grant, you know, nice-looking American hero. And he said, "Well, does he have a costume?" And I said, "Well, no." He said, "You got to have a costume." Said he couldn't sell it without a costume. Got to have a costume. So I put a mask on him. And he said, "He's got a mask." He said, "Well, that sounds good." And I said, "He's got gloves." He says, "Go with that. Go with that. That's great. Go." And he hung up. And so there I was, stuck with this character.
Eisner is such a great storyteller. And he came up, in fact, with a superhero, a true hero, who doesn't have any superpowers at all, but very symbolically, and this is something that happens to the hero in myth and also symbolically happens to the hero in comics when he's the true hero, and that is that he dies and is reborn. The spirit is Denny Colt. He's a cop, and he fakes his own death so that he can come back as the spirit, and lives in a cemetery, lives in Wildwood Cemetery, so that he can fight crime.
The problem I had with the spirit in the mask was that it violated something that was very important to me in my work. I want to be believed. I was dealing with reality.
I look at Will Eisner's work, it remains something to aspire to for me. Emotional reality is what I'm after. I mean, I'm no realist. I don't need a character to be able to fly for a character to be heroic for me. You know, it's a, as romantic as my stuff is, I find there an awful lot of romance in the real world that I can use. There ain't all that much difference between a long trench coat and a cape anyway.
So I think very few comic book guys decided to consciously do a myth. I think it did happen. And in the case of William Moulton Marsden with Wonder Woman, we know it did. But it's more that these are ideas that are innate and they find an expression in a given way because of what the writers and artists see around them, the air they breathe.
If you look at Superman, you see that he came from this other world, Krypton, this world that exploded, and that he's come to America. He's taken on this very super American kind of identity. I mean, he's clothed himself sort of partially in the colors of the flag. He's changed his name from Kal-El, his Kryptonian name, to this very arch wasp name, Clark Kent. You know, he's redefined himself, reinvented himself on these shores. And it's very easy to look at the Superman story as being at least in part the story of an immigrant from another world. And of course, Siegel and Schuster, these were two the sons of immigrants, of Jewish immigrants from Europe. You know, if you look at the creators, a lot of the early creators in comics, a lot of them were Jews, and a lot of them were the children of immigrants.
It seems that the majority of them grew up in New York, grew up in either the slums or at least working class neighborhoods. These kids lived in apartment buildings. They didn't live in single family dwellings in the suburbs. And this might have a lot to do with it. They saw much more of life than those kids from the suburbs, you know. And they had to make it. They had to make it. They were poor. Their parents had come to America. They were brought up on the American dream.
I definitely think there's at least some element in the whole sort of superhero myth, the narrative of the superhero, that is at least in part coming out of the promise that, you know, that is made to the immigrant. That when you come here, you don't have to be what you were there. You can be something totally new.
Superheroes are the biggest melting pot, I think. And I think that's why their particular entertainment value has sustained for so long.
I think Pfeiffer wrote an article once and said that we all knew that the Spirit was Jewish, even though his nose was short and he had an Irish name. Well, you know, I couldn't see making a superhero named Sam Goldstein or something like that. Just wouldn't work out. Even an Italian name wouldn't work out.
Would it work now? Have the audience?
Might work now. Might work now.
I think of myself as a second-generation comic book guy. The first-generation comic book guys were inventing it.
When you do comics, your enemy, your biggest enemy is time. Because you've got to find the right way to involve the reader in such a way that he or she doesn't speed through it. Because technically speaking, a comic book can be read in no time at all. But it isn't enjoyed if it's read too quickly.
The Spirit had several problems when I started. First of all, I had only 7 pages to tell a story. Now, some of my stories were long and some of them were short, but I only had 7 pages. I couldn't tell the short story in less than 7 pages. I couldn't tell a long story in more than 7 pages. So I had to devise ways of moving the story quickly. And that gave me an opportunity to invent panel arrangements. For example, some pages I had 10 or 15 panels on a page, and some pages I had only about 6 panels on the page. Panels, I learned, became part of the vocabulary. They became part of the punctuation, a form of punctuation. And they affect the rate of reading, they affect the psychological approach that you take the story. They can convey claustrophobia and they can convey openness.
Representing motion was a particular challenge for comics artists. Somehow we had to describe the motion of a figure running or a car driving and do it with a still image. So we created this convention of the motion line or streaks or blurs in the background. And we have all these different ways of doing it.
I'm mad about the idea of closure, that how much the eye can do with how little information. which I think is the entire science of comic books. I mean, you only get one image out of a potential 1,000. As you read a comic book, you're creating so many between those panels. It's wonderful.
I feel that the ultimate thing that people were looking for, like myself as a reader, was a feeling that this material we were reading about was truly real. We didn't necessarily want to believe it was a cartoon. We didn't want to dismiss it in that fashion.
It's magic realism. It is not real stuff. It is a funhouse mirror reflection, and we hope an entertaining reflection of reality. And you're allowed to be psychologically realistic and still play fast and loose with physical reality. The trick was and is, what is the archetype? What is this character really about? You can answer that and then put a contemporary sensibility on it, and you have a way to do any of these characters.
You know, I've also gone to another place too, like, you know, the crime comics or the more violently themed comics. If I had someone that didn't know a lot about comics, I would take them into the comic book store, and depending upon their sensibilities, I would give them all the Frank Miller I can find.
Well, comics definitely got darker in the 80s, and that's definitely probably due mostly to two people, and that would be Frank Miller and Alan Moore.
People knew for a long time that the superheroes in general were in trouble. Sales were so bad. This created a really nice atmosphere where publishers started saying, look, you know, let's let the inmates take over the asylum and see what happens, because, you know, things are getting pretty flat out here. And some of us were allowed to do so.
With Watchmen, I think what Alan and I were trying to do was not deliberately dirty everything up or show that all these idols had feet of clay, or that it was all a terribly psychologically flawed concept, because, you know, Alan and I both grew up loving superheroes, the best of superheroes, you know, what superheroes could be. But I think what we were interested in doing was saying, well, supposing superheroes really existed, because clearly, you know, the kind of Batman TV series showed that the traditional superhero would just be absurd in the real world. I mean, it just doesn't work. So we thought, well, supposing there was a rationale for there to be people who put costumes on, and there was a real Superman, for instance, what would he be like? And when you extrapolate from that, you realise that the people who were given the superpowers, or who decided to go and fight crime, might do it for much more human reasons than just this kind of abstract, you know, I have been gifted with powers, so I must save the world. You know, I think arguably, and I wouldn't want to be too cynical, that most people think, I've been gifted with powers, great, I can look through the wall of the girls' locker room. You know, I mean, you know, I'm not saying that's what I do. Clearly, I would save the world, but, you know, these things are interesting to explore.
And that's very different, really, from what Frank Miller did. Frank Miller just, The Dark Knight, I mean, he really made it dark and grim, and the complete opposite. Okay, Batman was always kind of a dark character, you know, the forces of the night and bats and everything, but he was just like all the original characters from the 40s, the superheroes from the 40s. He was very pure. He was there to fight evil. He was pure. Frank Miller made him very complicated and dark and took away the purity. He's not pure at all anymore. He isn't pure at all. In fact, Frank Miller's characters all have this corruption in them.
Here's the problem with talking about Miller. His trick is he doesn't like heroes.
Well, you know, my big problem with Batman is, why would the world need him? Yeah. The world's this perfect place in DC Comics land. And I thought, well, I'm looking out the window. That's not what I'm seeing. And it was kind of irresistible to do an anarchist superhero in Reagan's America.
My guess is that they saw those characters as manifestations of the establishment and decided to give them feet of clay. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable enterprise. It does diminish the hero archetype a lot. And if it's badly done, it's awful. It's sophomoric. To take some character who a couple of generations of Americans have looked on as a paragon and show that he's really a terrible jerk, where do you go with that? If you can get stories out of it, that's always my criterion. if you can use this as a point of departure to tell a terrific story, that's a reason for doing it.
Frank Miller can do a corrupt hero. He's a great writer. But so many, it's like the fad. This is the fashion in comics today, is to do corruption, is to do darkness, is to do vicious comics. And you have to be really good to do this. And most of them are not good. And all they have then are bleak stories, are stories of corruption, are stories in which there are no real heroes anymore. And there's a sadness to this, of course, because young boys are reading this, and young boys used to read Superman and Batman when they were true heroes, and read this and say, yes, I want to fight evil, I want to be good, I want to be a good person, because only by being a good person can I be a hero.
Well, young men are rebellious, and in fairness to Alan and the other people who were doing that, there was a lot to rebel against. Still is.
I think that we're outlaws. Comic book people are outlaws. I want us to be outlaws. We're born for it with this form.
You know, we've talked about superhero comics, and we've talked about why, you know, superhero comics came to be the thing they are. But I honestly do think the superhero comics are a genre that's taken over a medium. You know, they should be part of comics, yes, because they work very well in comics. But the fact that they more or less dominate the comic book field, particularly in the USA, is a source of great imbalance. And I think what we're finding is that, you know, as adolescents don't come into the field anymore, that the kind of basic raison d'etre of the superhero is kind of fading away.
I would like to see a change, and possibly comics will diversify, and you'll have comics that are aimed at more than just a young male audience.
I want to get just about everybody I can lay my hands on. I want to get all the guys who are getting concert tickets to buy my comics. I want to get all the girls who are going to see NSYNC to buy my comics. I want everybody. I want your parents. I want your children who aren't even born yet. And the thing is, I think that there is potential within the medium to do that. And the way I've orchestrated my particular work is to try and make it all as palpable and as real to you as I want to believe it is myself.
I don't really have a nihilist streak. My stories are essentially romantic. They just are rather harsh about it, that's all. But where comics can go is anywhere. I mean, I think it's very good that there are now several crime comics out there that each have completely different personalities.
I think that the future of comics is limitless because the idea of comics is just so simple at its heart that it's infinitely adaptable. It's possible for comics to adapt to any environment. Comics isn't just about paper and ink. As the web is becoming more important, it's very easy for me to see how comics can evolve and change in a digital environment in a way that stays very true to that basic idea of comics.
I still like mythology. It's a mythology thing for me. Those are still the Greek gods of American culture for me.
I don't believe superheroes will disappear or go away. They'll just continue to mutate until forever.